I'd like to tell you about this amazing live-in food forest society, a whole region of planet Earth where this kind of agroforestry that you see here was the way that people made their livelihoods. And it was so amazing that it's inspired millennia worth of myths and had an impact on our culture and the foods we eat that has lasted for thousands of years. In fact, we owe the people of this region the apple, the apricot, most of our walnuts, pomegranates, figs, peaches, all of these different fruits, pears, all come from this region, developed by these agroforestry specialists. It was so amazing, in fact, that these myths inspired people to go looking for it. In fact, during the Cold War and during the war, the Nazis, the Allies, the Soviets, the British, all went looking for a mythical city that didn't even exist because the rumors of this magical place were so powerful in our collective consciousness. And not only that, but it's had a lasting impact on world religions, on languages, culture, all thanks to, in my opinion, this way of life that they created in this region, going back to the end of the last ice age. So today I'm going to be telling you all about this amazing region. And as you can see, it's in the Himalayas and it's mountainous, and all of these peoples that we're going to talk about across this whole region created this way of life where they integrated food forests into their cities, into the mountains, and it's really spectacular to see. So we're going to take a look at a lot of the pictures. We're going to take a look at and talk about how they do this. We're going to find some things that we might be able to apply to our own gardening, because this is an amazing way of living, and it's incredibly sustainable and much lower work too. And yes, we're going to look at a lot of pictures, and they are truly beautiful, and we can see a lot of things. That's maybe one question I could ask you. If you're smart and you're clever, you're going to start looking for things that all these places have in common in these pictures I show you. Maybe you're starting to see some already. And on top of the fruit trees blossoming everywhere. So this is the region we're talking about through the Himalayas here. Especially starting in western China around Tibet and heading all the way over here through the Caucasus Mountains above my finger. And we could call the eastern part of this the China's Tian Shan mountain range. And yes, it changed the world. It gave us all of these fruits, and it went a lot further than that. So going back to when the last ice age ended, maybe 10,000 years ago, humans began to push back north and repopulate a lot of this area. But before the humans made it, a variety of fruit and nut trees like the walnut began to start spreading throughout the region again. And while it's known to be very arid and dry now, there was a time there where it was a lot wetter. And this supported a flourishing of human populations, but also intercontinental cultural communication. It's amazing to me to think that humans were traveling through so much of this region, thousands of years before the start of what we'd call civilization. And there was a lot of trade, there was a lot of exchange, as we'll see as we talk about some of the plants that moved around through the area. And this later would develop into what we call the Silk Road. So we could call this, there was actually this whole area through here was kind of the predecessor of the Silk Road. And we now know that the trade through this region preceded that, again, by thousands of years. And one of the things that we can really see is this with all the fruits and nuts that were spread throughout the region. So like I was saying, the people of this region, we owe them the apple. They domesticated the apple. We'll take a look in a little bit at some of the wild apple forests that were the ancestors of our apples. And of course, they spread walnuts throughout this region, creating these giant walnut forests that have lasted through today. A lot of these are now known to be maybe 2,000 years old, spread by people specifically, and that they were planted by humans. We used to think that these walnut forests were just natural. Like with a lot of the world, when Europeans began exploring and finding these food forest kind of systems on every continent, we'd always say, lucky people. Look, they just happened to be put here by God or whatever into this place that's like a Garden of Eden, where they have all of these great fruits and nuts and food just growing wild. Well, now we know that's actually the people did this. People spread them. They began cultivating these plants and planted giant food forests, knowing that it might take hundreds of years in some cases for them to really become fully productive, yet they made that investment in the future. And the pomegranate, too, which came from Pakistan and Afghanistan. And again, there are still kind of wild pomegranate forests, or it's really a dryland species, and but they're still there, and the wild ancestors of pomegranates are still there. 5,000 years ago, they began domesticating pomegranates. Same thing with pears. We owe pears to the people of the Caucasus Mountains. A really interesting thing is that in a lot of these regions that were like food foresting cultures, and you can find a fascinating paper on pear tree cults, that trees were worshipped. It's not surprising if you build a way of life based on trees that you end up having a tree cult. You end up having a situation where trees are worshipped and considered sacred. And in fact, today, through a whole lot of this region, especially into Turkey and in the Caucasus Mountains again, trees are still worshipped as sacred to some extent, and even in places where Islam is now the primary religion, the heads of state and the church have tried to get people to stop worshiping trees. Yet these sacred trees remain, and people still will tie ribbons to them and other things to them, and make wishes and ask the trees to fulfill their wishes. In a lot of the region, it was really common to have a sacred tree where people would go and ask the tree for things, have the tree oversee weddings and marriages, and have the tree resolve conflicts between families. This would be a place where you would go and, in the sight of the sacred tree, resolve your conflict with another family. So trees were very important. It's very probable, too, that those things go together, right? That to some extent, the trees spread and became something that people worshipped, and they kept planting those trees and improving those trees, things like pears, because they were considered sacred. So those two things, those two pressures kind of went together. It's fascinating. And I mean, I consider pears pretty sacred. So it's fascinating to me to know that people invested that feeling of sacredness and something very special in these fruit trees as they developed these. So, and like I said, one of the most interesting things about this whole this society is this whole episode of the myths being inspired by it, and that these myths ended up, especially of a mythical place in the mountains, often called like Shambala or Xanadu. So that Westerners have been looking for these places like Shambala for a long time, and during World War II, the Nazis, the Soviets, Americans, and British all went to the region and sent spies there to look for this mythical place, Shambala. And so this is an older representation of the idea of Shambhala, this live in food forests that maybe in our imaginations look something like some of the pictures that I've already shown you. Well, think about that for a second. Why would that be? Why would this sort of a place be considered very sacred? Imagine that you lived as somebody in like the Bronze Age or before then, and you lived down in a settled area. Maybe you lived, so this is Sumerian here, and what we start to get in the places where most humans lived, because civilization was beginning to flourish, in city-states. And we know a lot of things happen when we start to invent agrarian living and settled living, especially agriculture. See, agriculture, for one, it tended to happen a lot more in the plains and in low-lying areas and in valleys, whereas up in the mountains, it was, the mountains are rock, so it's harder to till. You don't have huge fields. If you do, you have lots of rain, and the soil just all washes away. So agriculture tended to develop more in valleys and low-lying places and in river floodplains. And so some interesting things that go along with that, agriculture and farming, are that, one, as soon as you start farming, you destroy the soil. So the tilling, the taking nutrients from the soil all the time, causes a nutrient collapse. And so what do you do? Your nutrients collapsed. Your population goes up because you invent farming, and then you have this nutrient collapse, and you're either going to watch everybody die, or you're going to go to the next city over and steal their food. So anthropologists consider expansionism and war one of the defining characteristics of farming societies, agrarian civilizations. The two go together. You can't have one without the other unless you change the fundamental way you do farming. And another thing that goes with it also think about that war thing. When you're down in the valley, it's a lot easier to just go to the town next door. You can ship things really easily. You got wheels. You can move things. You can roll things over there, take their food, bring it back. Set up a system of taxes where they got to pay you next year, or you're going to come and beat them up again. That transportation also means that we get more transport of diseases. So in areas like this, we know there's a lot more spread of diseases, and people are living, cheek to jowl with livestock much more down in here in agrarian areas, and probably using manures to fertilize, and so there's more zoonotic diseases, and then we have transport, and everybody's moving all over the place, so we're spreading those diseases all around. There's a lot of trade throughout the region. There are very few barriers to it, so we get the spread of diseases. The switch to agriculture also is far less nutritious. We start to get more of our calories from things like grains, and less from more diverse plant foods. So we get the diseases of civilization. Again, a defining characteristic of farming societies, according to anthropologists. Since you've got warrior bands going around stealing the food, you got to be able to stockpile it, and you got to be able to defend it. So you're going to need classes. You're going to need a warrior class, and you're going to need people to keep growing the food for you. As soon as we start to get at this, we start, again, some of the defining characteristics of farming civilizations: slavery, oppression, much more defined hierarchies and classes, a police state, right? We start to get a lot more harsh punishments in these areas. So basically, life is looking a lot more brutal, a lot shorter, and more difficult. So imagine you're from one of these kinds of civilizations, and you witness short lives with lots of disease, lots of violence, warrior bands coming through all the time, lots of slavery. And then you go up and you make it into the mountains, and you find yourself in some place that looks much more like this. And with that, we know that in these regions, for the most part, when they're surrounded by mountains, it's really hard to get armies into there. There's a lot less war. There's a lot less expansionism because of that. So for one thing, life is a lot more peaceful. And with that, There's a lot less hierarchy and a lot less oppression. Women tend to be respected a lot more, just because everybody's a little more violent. There isn't so much of a need to have like warrior men who are really good at killing people to be in charge of everything. This way of life that is tree-based also has much more consistent yields. You don't have that decline in fertility and destruction of fertility that requires you to go and kill everybody in the neighboring city-state. So even when the Mongol Empire came to this region and took it over, we know that it was a lot less violent than in other places. And like the first time that Tibet was conquered, it was only like there were only like 500 casualties or something like that. And for the most part, and even that was after some Tibetan lords decided that they were not going to pay tribute to the Mongol Empire. So for the most part, they just said, think about that. If you're in one of the plains areas, it's a lot easier than trying to get an army through these mountains. It's a lot easier to threaten them and say, if you don't give us money, we're going to send an army up there after you. So the life must have looked pretty great here, right? And not to mention that there's food literally growing on trees. It's like all of the myths of the Garden of Eden. So, and life expectancy automatically goes way up. In a lot of these regions, there were myths of people living very routinely to be 80, 90, 100 years old. So you get, without that spreading of disease and a much healthier diet, you just get a lot longer lives. It must have seemed like some sort of an earthly paradise. We're going to scroll back through all these here. And so that started this whole myth or must have been the start of this myth of places like Shambala, a mythical city in the mountains someplace. Think about that. You see one of these civilizations. It's very easy to think, the next mountain line over, there might be another one. It's very easy to have this myth started of this magical place that somebody visited and have others go looking for it. Speaking of, here's somebody who did that. This is Madame Blavatsky, a very famous Russian woman originally. I believe she immigrated to the United States. And she's also famous for founding the Theosophical Society, which exists still today. And she was a noted spiritualist who had a lot of run-ins with people for claiming that she was making up some of her spiritual phenomenon, such as speaking with. She was very clear that they weren't ghosts. She claimed that she went to Tibet and was allowed into Shambhala itself and trained in Shambhala, mythical city, and learned special spiritual technologies and insights. And she claimed that one of the things that she learned there was that ghosts are not actually the spirits of the dead, but kind of like shells, as she put it, sort of earthly echoes. And but still, she claimed to be able to communicate with them and put on some spectacular shows, and was accused of being a fraud. And but this whole idea of her visiting Shambhala and learning special spiritual technologies there, technologies that might be very useful in a war, ended up spreading through Europe of the time in the Victorian era. So by the 1930s or so, James Hilton published Lost Horizon, and made popular the word Shangri-La after visiting the Hunza Valley in Gilgit-Baltistan, Pakistan. One of these places, really the main picture that I've been showing you is from the Hunza Valley, an apricot and walnut and apple-based food forest system. And apricots are a major part of their diet there and have been a major part of their diet. And it's beautiful, and many of his descriptions of Shangri-La actually look like cities in Gilgit-Baltistan. So, he kind of implied, that he might have visited some place or visited these lost places, like and that there might be this something to this lost city. And so this whole idea was really spreading through Europe at the time. And of course, Adolf Hitler was into all sorts of wacky stuff. So he heard it and thought, well, if there is this lost paradise in the mountains there, they're probably Caucasians, and they're probably part of the lost Aryan race. And so they're going to side with us, the Nazis, and give them spiritual technology, which is kind of fun in a way because, of course, what we're really talking about is a myth created by a local indigenous people who were very much not Aryan. And I kind of find there to be something poetic to that now we know, of course, that this whole Aryan race stuff was completely made up garbage. And the people through this region were actually probably the long-standing indigenous people of this range who created this whole system. So, of course, that's not meant. So if Hitler's going to go looking for them, so were the Soviets. And so, in fact, there was a Soviet spy, an agent of the secret police, who actually convinced Stalin's head of the secret police to go to pay him to go looking for Shambala. And they had some really interesting programs at the time. For example, they were trying to create war dogs. They were trying to create psychic war dogs. And they thought maybe these people of Shambhala would know these secret mind control techniques, having heard about it from Madame Blavatsky. And again, he thought, well, if there is this paradise nation in the mountains, they'd probably be sympathetic to the communists. So they would join the Soviet side, he thought, and convince them so. And so they paid for his expedition to find this imaginary place, Shambhala. And while FDR and Churchill were not usually into such sort of things, you shouldn't take any risks when psychic war dogs are on the line. So Churchill sent real-life James Bond, or at least one of them, Peter Fleming. And Peter Fleming was one of the nephews of Ian Fleming, who wrote James Bond, the James Bond novels, and he's considered one of the potential models, along with Christopher Lee, which I find fascinating. Did you know that Saruman was one of the models for James Bond? Think about that. And so Saruman, Peter Fleming was sent to look for Shambhala also. And again, FDR sent people too, in traditional American style. He sent a cadre of A-list celebrities and bearing expensive gifts, like this Patek Philippe watch, valued at over millions of dollars these days, to bribe the Dalai Lama to tell them where Shambhala was, and also more publicly to try to gain access to China to help the Chinese fight against the Japanese. And he sent none other than Leo Tolstoy's grandson, because the Dalai Lama was a Tolstoy fan, in addition to being a fan of expensive watches. By the way, the Dalai Lama still has this watch, loves to repair it, and loves to show it off. So FDR also sent one of my favorite artists, and there's a whole podcast about that. Nikolai Roerich was sent to find Shambhala. And Nikolai Roerich never did claim to find Shambhala, but he did give us several beautiful paintings of the mysterious light supposedly emanating from the hidden city. Some very beautiful pieces depicting the Himalayas, and very beautiful spiritual pieces about the landscape, this beautiful otherworldly landscape with a lot of the greenery in the background. some of these. So, yeah, here's another great article about that time that a Soviet spy convinced the government to pay for him to go find a magical, mythical city. Imagine all these spies running around in Asia, looking for a mythical place that probably most of the Asians in the region knew was just a myth. Kind of tickles me. So, this brings us to, let's get back to the fruit and to the apples in the region, because if nothing else is going to inspire myths of a beautiful, perfect place, it's the apple. I love apples so much. And in this region, you can still go and visit some of the ancestors of our modern apples, the wild apples in the apple forest of Kazakhstan. And a pretty amazing place. And so there's actually still these forests, and people go and they harvest them. They've maintained these wild apple forests. And it's up in this region. You see a crescent-shaped lake on the eastern side of Afghanistan. That is kind of the region again that connects and down through Kyrgyzstan, down into northern Afghanistan and Pakistan, and this region of China, and all the way over east past into the Caucasus Mountains over on this side. So this is one of those apple forests, one of the wild apple forests in the mountains of Kazakhstan. And it's interesting to see, again, there's probably walnuts in there too. There's often this mix of walnuts and other fruits. Whatever the fruit of the region is, we're going to see this a lot. Again, just some more pictures of those forests. And a lot of times what we're going to see in a lot of these pictures is a mix of different things. We could call it used to be called the mixed agropastoral way of life. So a lot of times there would, be crops grown in through here, and there would be livestock often herded through these mountains as well. Now, it used to be thought that this was just a pastoral way of life. And that, again, these people were just lucky to be surrounded by all these fruit trees and nut trees, and that the main thing that they did was a nomadic pastoral way of life. But now we know that settled living and low-intensity agriculture, especially this food forestry type of agriculture and domestication of these fruits and nuts, was a big part of their lifestyle. And today, we see a lot more integration of human settlement right into the food forest, which is fascinating. Big live-in food forests. So, and what we see a lot more now down there are often crops grown in the understory of these trees. It looks like there's also a lot of mustards through there, and very intentional development of crops in the understory of the fruit trees. So what we're going to talk about and what we're going to see a lot more of is that this mixed agropastoral way of life that continues on today really is multifaceted. It has these fruits that grow wild. It has nuts as a big part of it. It has the pastoral component of livestock through a lot of the region, and a lot of that's for dairy. So there's a lot of vegetarianism through the region too, in Tibet, in the Caucasus, and in Pakistan. So, which is also fascinating, but they still eat a lot of dairy, and then honey, and any kind of other forest products that they can put together. Different people have different jobs. They kind of collectively manage these food forests, but they're managed with micro enterprises. Everybody has a way of obtaining a yield, as we'd say in permaculture, from the work that they do to maintain the system. Whether it's the livestock, and you have a livestock micro enterprise, whether you're someone who goes and gathers fruits and nuts, depending on the time of year, you dry them, you take them to the market. Everyone has these different jobs that they do, and then everyone also can collectively make improvements in the forest and manage and clean up the forest as well. More pictures, very interesting, of the of crops being integrated, grown in patches right underneath these food forest systems. Just classic food forestry stuff through here. Lots of berries. Berries are often integrated through these too. I see a little bit of a fenced off area. Probably they're using livestock integrated through here and reserving some parts for vegetable garden, just integrated right into the food forest. And we'll see that again and again and again. So you see that in the Hunza Valley, Galkit, Baltistan. Some of famous for being some of the longest lived people on the planet. There's some controversies about this. And it's a fascinating controversy because this goes along with a lot of the blue zones ideas. These are the places that were reported to be some of the longest living places on the planet. People had, it's not unusual to have people live to be like 100 years old in some of these blue zones. And now there are a lot of people who are really like much more fond of modern capitalism and modern medicine and all of that, pushing back saying, wait. People live longer now, but there's really, in my opinion, people are speaking past each other on some of this because the people who are supporting this kind of diet and life way don't want to get rid of Western medicine, right? So what we're really kind of arguing for is let's have smart diets, let's have smart ways of life, let's have these food forests, let's have that health-enhancing impact of this, and let's also have like modern medicine, ideally. So, what do we got here? A majestic paradise of heritage and scenic beauty. By the way, a lot of this region now is a desert region. How are these people growing all these fruit and nut forests in the desert? A few things. One, they have long-standing, in fact, going back now we know thousands of years, it used to be thought that Christian missionaries and Islamic leaders, when they took over the region, brought in things like aqueducts and irrigation systems, but now we know they go back way further than that. So people began developing smart irrigation systems through this area, but also they were selecting and cultivating the trees for drought resistance. So a lot of these varieties even today are known to be extremely climate resistant, extremely drought resistant, because that's what they were cultivated and selected for thousands of years. Look at this again. This tapestry in the Hunza Valley is it's a vegetarian lifestyle. Again, still lots of dairy. But potatoes are now a major crop. Think about that. Here they've integrated in something from South America, integrated from a mountainous region of Peru that looks very similar to this, very similar climate and climate zone. So the potato is perfectly at home here. Wheat polycultures were also big. In all this, you see this like trying to catch every single drop of water, get it into the ground. So lots of earth shaping, lots of these waffle-like designs of these fields, this beautiful tapestry integrating all these fruit trees with other crops. And of course, with homes. So just some of the crops again, these apricots, apples, figs, nuts that are popular throughout the region. And now this one is in Tibet. And here, Tibet is the home of peaches. So This is around Lhasa in Tibet, and this is the Peach Blossom Festival, or during the peach blossom time of year. And again, we see basically this is an agroforestry peach system with other crops grown in the understory in small field systems with lots of irrigation and smart things like that. All of the landscapes in all these areas look very similar, but they're adapting it for what the fruit trees are that are most resistant and most resilient. There, it's comparative advantage. Here in Tibet, the wild peaches are the ancestors of our modern peaches, and they just grow wild there, so you eat lots of peaches. Tom Robbins knows with his novel Tibetan Peach Pie. So, hey, all you agroforestry and permaculture nerds who are watching this, we get to this, and this is the point where you go, ooh, 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 what do we got here? So something that looks very much like an old form of alley cropping, right? And it's very terraced, you can tell. So this is like a combination of so many cool things going on right here. It's agroforestry. It has these peaches all through here, and they have cropping in the understory and alleys of the peaches. It's very possible in a region like this that they're also running livestock through here at different times of the year, and it's a beautiful landscape too. So it makes me want to visit. I want to see these places, but what's better than visiting? Again, integration of human habitat and settlement right into these food forest type systems. Places, for a while, these were all being pulled out of this region to modernize the agriculture, and it was leaving people very impoverished. And now there's a movement of recreating these peach-based food forest systems, or peach-based systems, agroforestry systems, and people are making, like I saw one report of a guy who was making $14,000 US dollars a year, having come from a situation of abject poverty just off of his peach system that he had replanted. So I just love looking at this and seeing how similar it is to all of the other regions that we were looking at. Imagine this just whole region where they evolved this food forestry way of life that over the millennia has adapted and evolved together, and yet some components of it have remained very, very similar. We talked about having tree cults. I wouldn't say that having tree blossom festivals is quite the same as a cult, but or a religion, but that it is pretty similar. People traveling from around the world to go here and having this just whole celebration of this sacred tree of their region. I think it's beautiful. So, yeah, not a whole lot more to say. Just taking in some of the views here. If you want to read more about this is a great book from one of the leading researchers on this topic. All these fruits and nuts that came from the Silk Road, and it's an interesting read. And back to Nikolai Roerich. So, thank you for watching, and if you like this, if you like learning about agroforestry and food forestry kinds of systems, then you should check out my books, including Beauty and Abundance. It's a huge, massive tome, all about developing systems like this, and these are just some screenshots. It talks through the water harvesting, it talks about crop selection, their plant profiles, everything you need to know to design these systems. Yeah, I appreciate y'all watching. You can design systems like this, like mine. And we don't have to go to Central Asia to visit a food forest paradise. We can recreate a food forest paradise right wherever we live. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.